On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Beth Scheer. She is the talent partner at Homebrew. We're going to be talking about an interesting subject, and that's how do you help a founder find a coach? I knew I'd get tongue-tied on that. But it's an interesting subject because I think a lot of times founders are looking for someone to help coach them, mentor them, and being able to look in the right places, knowing how to find that coach is really important. Beth has a great background on this. I'm excited to cover this topic. Beth, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely. All right, let's start off at the top. I guess I'd love to kind of find out, make sure everyone understands what Homebrew does, and then as the talent partner at Homebrew, what are some of those responsibilities that you're in charge of?
Sure. So Homebrew is a seed stage venture firm. We've been around for about 10 years. I've been there for 7.5. The two guys who founded Homebrew are former colleagues of mine from Google, Hunter Walk and Satya Patel. We all sort of knew each other there and then reconnected many years later. And we have about 90 companies in our portfolio, and that is across 4 different funds. We are based in the Bay Area, but we have companies everywhere and even outside of the US now. We're starting to do some investing in Latin America. We have a company in Canada, and then we've obviously got Bay Area, New York, and kind of all over the US.
Awesome. And I guess as a talent partner, what are some of those responsibilities that you're in charge of?
Sure. So my job is actually not to do recruiting for the companies, first and foremost. My job is to teach our founders, especially the first-time founders who haven't done this before, how to build teams. And that doesn't just mean recruiting. It means everything from onboarding, compensation, thinking about company culture and interview process, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So anything that falls under the talent umbrella, there is some overlap with HR, but my background is really in talent, not in HR.
Absolutely. All right. I guess this topic's, when we first talked about it, I was like, this is really an important subject. I think, I think if you're not a founder even, and you're looking for a mentor, I think you can probably draw a lot from this conversation as well. But I guess we're talking specifically about founders finding a coach. And, we were talking about early stage startups that potentially are in a position of growth, and what does a coach look for? But I guess let's start off at the top. Like, why would a founder look for a coach? Like, what is it that they're hoping to achieve in finding a coach?
So, anybody who's self-aware, I think, always wants to improve, whether that is as a founder, as a manager, as a leader, as a partner in a relationship. So, sometimes it's really just a founder coming to us and saying, hey, I want to be a better CEO. That can be a first-time founder. A lot of times we'll have a second or even third-time founder say, hey, this is, a different kind of company. I've done X before, but I really need to focus on Y now. And, a trend that we've seen is that founders are coming to us earlier and asking for coaching. It's not seen as a negative thing. Now, there are situations where a founder may get feedback after a board meeting where there's a certain area they want them to really focus on. So in that case, it's a more reactive process. But for the most part, I will get a referral from, usually one of my partners, and they'll say, hey, this founder is thinking about working with a coach. Can you give some names? Can you talk to them? And my process is pretty thorough. I don't just give names. I think by doing that, you're really not setting them up for success in the process, because there's, so many different types of coaches out there. So my job is really to find out from each founder, what problems are they actually looking to solve? What do they hope to get out of coaching? How do they want to measure success? And also then there's the soft stuff, the personalities. Sometimes they want to work with somebody more therapeutic. Sometimes they want to work with somebody more directive. So I take all that information and then give them a list of coaches.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, yeah, different fits, different voices, different styles, all that has to kind of mesh together. When I guess, when you're actually looking to make a recommendation, and let's say someone's being proactive, when you're listening to what their needs are, you're trying to think through some of those parameters and you're trying to better understand what that match would be. Are there certain clues you're looking for, certain type of styles that you think would potentially fit better for, that co-founder coach match?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on what are the problems they're trying to solve. So I've had founders come to me with anything from how do I manage these relationships? I have a work style that's not working with one of my reports, to a higher level sort of how do I manage stress or prioritizing? Sometimes, especially with a first time founder, they're facing sort of imposter syndrome. It could be delivering difficult feedback. It could be interpersonal conflict or making tough decisions, building team culture. So based on what problems they're trying to solve, then I'm going to go to my list of coaches who I've either met or spent time with and say, okay, what is this person best at? Most coaches that our founders work with come from operator backgrounds. They've either founded a company, they've been the chief product officer or the chief technology officer. These are not people that have just been coaching. So the problems that they've solved in their past, the coaches, are going to easily translate to help our current founders.
I mean, that makes sense. I think you mentioned a couple of problems that people are tackling. I guess imposter syndrome's tricky. I think that different groups face that, and I think within, if I'm listening and you're a co-founder and you're thinking, oh, this is how I should be operating versus this is actually how you are operating. There's a big gap when you see these. I guess when you see somebody who's self-aware and they come to you, I think that's maybe they're identifying that in themselves. People that are not self-aware, I guess, and somebody else is recommending that they find a coach. Does that person approach this process a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, in my 7.5 years at Homebrew, I can only remember one situation where it was us saying, this person needed a coach. And it is a big commitment on both parts. So you really have to be able to prioritize the time and the work. Usually there's homework in between meetings, and it's a big expense. And if your company is willing to invest in you, that means they want you to stick around and be a better version of yourself. So I can only recall one situation. And again, we're a smaller fund, so I'm sure this does happen a lot, where we were this person was not a founder. They were on the executive team. They were recommended to see a coach. And, I think he didn't take it the right way, but he agreed to do it and couldn't commit to it. And I got feedback from both sides. And the reality was this person just really wasn't ready to prioritize and really go deep and start peeling those layers off of the onion. This person ended up not being a long-term fit for the company.
I guess when you're, just listening, obviously, just thinking through the commitment involved, and I could understand that if I don't have buy-in, the commitment's going to be weak. But the homework makes sense. Outside of homework, can you maybe kind of talk about some of the commitment that is required to make this work and work in a positive fashion?
Absolutely. I mean, it varies from coach to coach. Everybody's got their own methodology, but it can be meeting every other week for an hour and a half. Plus, a coach might make them available, for a certain amount of time during the month. In some cases, it might be once a month, but a longer meeting. It really just depends.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. You do have to see what the coach their process is like to kind of be involved in that. So if I'm someone that's like, hey, I want to find a coach, you make a recommendation. Great. I've got a list of 5 or 6 people. I need to talk to these people. Obviously all of them are trying to assess me as well. What am I looking for? Like, in that interview process, I'm talking to different coaches. What am I hoping to see so that I can make the right pick, or at least pick the one that I feel that is the best fit for me?
Absolutely. And I'm going to talk about this sort of in two buckets. One, there's actually the founder talking to the coach and getting information. And I always recommend they talk to like 3 to 4 people. They don't need to talk to 10 people. But then the second piece is doing a reference check where that founder is going to talk to either people that coach is currently coaching or people that coach has coached in the past, because that's where you're really going to get your good information. So if a founder is talking to 3 coaches, these are the types of questions. I mean, I list them out. I actually have a document on the Homebrew website under resources about coaching. So you can find all this information. So first is, just tell me about your process. How do you work? Most coaches will do something called a 360 review in the beginning. And that's really gathering feedback from everybody in the company who works with this person. So it's not just, one-sided, the coach or the founder explaining their problems. It's other people and how they're interpreting those problems, strengths, weaknesses, all that. So they're really getting a holistic view of this person. Next question is time commitment. And I think that needs to be, established in the beginning. Asking about homework. Asking about how they're going to help figure out the blind spots. Because again, every coach has a different process. Defining and measuring success is a tricky one because every coach does it different and every founder has a different way of measuring himself or herself. So I think really digging in with the coach, well, okay, if I spend 3 months doing my homework and showing up and paying you a lot of money, how are we going to measure if I'm doing better? So I think that's a really important question to ask. And then the last thing is I think a founder should always say to a coach, okay, based on what you know about me, if I'm not a fit for you, is there anybody you would recommend I speak with? And then the other piece is, okay, you've talked to 3 coaches. You really like one of them, but you want to really dig a bit. So the next set of questions is actually talking to a former or a current client of the coach. Maybe it's somebody you know, maybe it's somebody the coach refers you. I think you want to understand, well, what was the catalyst for this person working with the coach, and do their problems or concerns resonate with you? Why and how did they choose this person? How long have you been working with the coach? And if they fired the coach or stopped working with them, what was that process like? If it wasn't a good match, why not? And if it's a former client, the question I always want to know is if they wish they did anything different, what would that have been during the process? So again, those 2 sets of questions are in different buckets, but I think it's really important when you're doing the reference checking to ask the right questions.
Absolutely interesting. One thing just popped in my mind because you mentioned cost, and I don't think we've even touched on it, but just at a high level, I mean, I don't want you to commit to it, but what do we typically see for these costs? And again, someone that's never had a coach or not looked into it potentially might be like, well, this might just be too expensive. Is there just ballpark ranges?
Sure. I mean, it really varies on experience of the coach. You'll see some coaches charge a monthly retainer. And the nice thing about that is they'll say, okay, you can call me whenever, even though we're only meeting for, 2 hours a month, but it can be anywhere from $250 to $600 an hour, or it might be a monthly retainer of a couple $1,000s. It really varies depending on level of coach. So I'm leery to give a number, but, it really does depend on experience.
Okay. No, I think that's helpful. I think, but it's good to know that it could be hourly, could be a monthly retainer.
Right. Right.
Obviously,
and that's important to ask early. I always encourage our founders because they'll ask me and I'll say, look, a lot of times if it's a first-time founder at a seed stage company, the coach may have some flexibility. Sometimes coaches will ask for equity in addition to cash. We're seeing a lot of different types of asks. What I'd like to add, regarding sticker shock is, yes, it is expensive. And why would a seed stage company invest in a founder or an executive team leader so early when, they're just trying to keep the trains running? And what I would say to that is, look, without great people, you don't have a great company. So you've got to invest in your people so that they have the tools to be successful. And therefore, the chances of the company being successful will be much higher.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly makes sense. I mean, that it sounds like it does have costs. It does have time commitment, which is a different form of a cost. So I think, there's got to be, commitment on everyone's part, or, the founder. So I guess, you kind of walked us through, the reference check, what to kind of look for, how you want to be looking for a coach in the interview process. What should you watch out for? Like, obviously, I'm assuming, if I'm looking for help, sometimes things are going to sound really great. Like, this person's going to hit it out of the park. Maybe there's even some good rapport early. Are there red flags to look for to go, hey, this coach, maybe isn't going to be the right fit, even though some of it sounds good?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, if you get on a Zoom with a coach and they're distracted and you feel they didn't give you 100% of their attention, I think that's a red flag. If the person hasn't worked with anyone at a company similar to yours, maybe it's a startup or an early stage company, and your coach has only worked with huge corporations, that person might, an emphasis on might, because there's always exceptions, but if that person can't relate with the type of environment you're coming from, it may not be a good fit. And I also tell people to watch out for when a coach may tell you something kind of far-fetched, like, I've got 100% success rate of helping executives achieve their goals. The reality is measuring is a tricky one. And there's no way a coach has had 100% success rate unless they're defining it in terms that are really not definable. If somebody is not willing to provide credible recent references, that would be a red flag. I think if you detect ego, this person doesn't want to work with you, maybe because, you haven't had a successful exit yet, and they're more interested in being able to align themselves with a well-known founder versus actually doing the coaching, that's a major red flag. I think if somebody wants a lengthy commitment, let's say it's 6 months, and they're requiring an upfront payment, you and your coach may not click, and you should be able to terminate the relationship after a month or so. And one of the things I talk about in my document that I mentioned on the Homebrew site is, well, how do you break up with a coach? So a reputable coach is going to be fine terminating the relationship after a few weeks if the chemistry isn't there. I equate this sort of to finding a therapist. It's okay to fire your therapist if you feel that after a few sessions, you don't want to spend time with this person and you're not going to be able to get what you need out of them. No one really wants to waste time if it isn't a good match. So locking you into a commitment with somebody for 6 months and paying up front, that would be a major red flag.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's some fantastic tips. I guess one scenario that I was thinking about in terms of, coaches is, obviously I might know someone that's working with a coach, a buddy of mine or somebody I know. And it's like, hey, this person's been working with me. I think they're fantastic. Hey, give them a try. In the back of my mind, I might just be assuming, well, if they're, doing a good job with this person, maybe that will be a good coach for me. Maybe that biases me a little bit because of that. Is that a concern?
Absolutely. And that's why you have to ask the question. So let's say your friend is a chief marketing officer who's been working with this person. This person may have, actually have been a former CMO. If you are a CTO or a VP of engineering, maybe you feel strongly about working with somebody who's actually done what you're doing before. So I do think in a lot of cases, having that functional operator experience is really important. So just because a coach is a great coach for somebody else does not mean that. You have to go through the process and ask all these questions and do the references.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a great topic. I think a lot of people, benefit from coaching. I think it's got to be tricky. I think you mentioned, the analogy to, finding a therapist. I think, having that comfort, that trust that you can open up. And I think without that, also the coach is at a disadvantage in terms of being able to really connect with you and find some of the areas that you need to, they need to help with, because it's that, opening up those wounds of, hey, I'm just not good at this. And some of it is not easy to talk about.
Exactly.
Awesome. That Homebrew document, we'll make sure we link that in the show notes, because obviously it sounds like a great resource. And if someone's listened to the episode and wants to dive in a little bit further into some of what you mentioned, we'll obviously have that in there. I was going to ask you, I love asking the thought leaders this question, and it is, if you could ask the next guest or future guest a single question or have them talk about a topic, what would you want them to cover?
I mean, this is a very selfish ask because it's something I'm working on for our founders, but any talent partners, or operators out there, or investing partners who've had experience sort of guiding founders how to work with different stage VCs. So, for example, let's say Homebrew does the seed round. Then we sort of pass them along, even though we may still be involved, we may do a follow-on round, but we're not the lead investors anymore. Now they're working with a much larger firm that has a talent team of 10 people. What are best practices so that founder knows how to work with that next team? And then what happens when they raise their Series B? Do they still talk to the team from Series A? How do they get the most out of the talent team as they're going from, very early stage firm all the way through, maybe they get bought by a private equity firm. How do they work with them? But I just think giving founders a guide on how to get the best out of your talent folks when you are essentially working for a multi-stage VC.
That's awesome. That's actually a really good one. I think either my talent podcast or my technical podcast, I think both groups could potentially have some insights into that. It's a phenomenal question. So while it might be useful for you, I think a lot of people would benefit from that. So thank you for mentioning that. What's a good way of someone to get a hold of you? Obviously, we talked a lot about coaching. We'll link to the document, but if somebody wants to reach out to you just to follow up, what's a good way to do that?
Sure. Email is probably the best. It's beth@homebrew.co. And my email's on our website as well.
Okay, brilliant. We'll make sure everyone knows that. We'll link to that document as well. Beth, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing excellent content.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, I always ask for two things. One, if you found the episode useful, share it with someone else who might. That's how we grow, and I appreciate that. Secondly, if you or someone that can actually speak to Beth's question, I'd love to have you on. I think it's a great topic. I think a lot of people would benefit from listening to that discussion. Reach out to me, let me know. Otherwise, until next time, thank you and goodbye.